Okay, so before we get to the go back to the Gemara and the Rashi and Tosafos, thought maybe we'll learn a simple piece in the Tzemach Tzedek. The Rabbi Bachlal encouraged that when we can, we should learn from our Rabbeim. There's a number of times that we talked about that the Tzemach Tzedek and the Alter Rebbe's Inyanim and Nigla should be more incorporated into the limit of the Gemara. So this חידושי Tzemach Tzedek, this is the book here. It's חידושי al Shas. It's part of a set of Tzemach Tzedek on Nigla. Most of it is Shal Shechuvas Responsa, and there's one volume of חידושים on Shas. So you can find scattered throughout the Shal Shechuvas, also Biur and Gemara, obviously. But anyway, there's a few different pieces from the Mishnah, but at least we're going to do one or two shtiklach here. Okay, so you have it there in the chat. I posted the picture there. So number one, the Tzemach Tzedek writes like this: Mishnah Aleph HaShutfin Shirat Zochulu. Okay. Kosav Rambam, the Perek Beis Mehilcha Shchein. The Rambam writes in chapter 2 of the laws of neighbors, Halach Yudalad, Halach section 14, Sehezek Riyah Hezeku, that the damage done by vision is an actual damage. That's like Paskins. Paskins that it's that Hezek Riyah Shmei Hezek, as we already know, we've already established that when we learned the Gemara. The Rambam writes it as well. V'chein Kosav Agos Manminis. The Goy's Maminis, which is a commentary on the Rambam, says the same thing. Shem Ois Yud over there in section 10. And B'Shem Tosafos, there he quotes the Tosafos. And the Smag, which is Sefer Mitzvahs Gdolos, is an early halachic decider. Also, Paskins that Hezek Riyah is a Hezek. And the reason is, the Smag writes, the reason is, Mishum, the Rabbi Yochanan Sever came, because Rabbi Yochanan is on that side. I don't know when that is. I think it's going to come up soon, I suppose. We haven't learned that yet. But Rabbi Yochanan sides with the opinion that Hezek Riyah is a Hezek. And that's a reason enough to pass in that way, says the Smag. And secondly, he says that answers that are deflections we don't rely on. This is something Tosafos also mentioned, that when the Gemara, as we learned last week, and we're going to learn further today, on the opinion which says that Hezek is not a Hezek, the Gemara has a bunch of questions, and the Gemara has answers that are deflections. And when the Gemara introduces the opinion which reads Hezek is a Hezek, the Gemara doesn't have many questions. And that itself is indication that the halacha follows that way. Okay. Tosafos didn't say this clearly. Tosafos said just from the fact that the word is savrua, right? Okay. Now, this is like a little Indian. Now, that it's almost like adds another reason why we should pass in that way. So far, the reasons are two. So far, we have later. It's later in the Gemara, I assume. I haven't looked at the Gemara yet. I don't know. Oh, the fact that it's a Birchan in itself means that the halacha follows that. Is that a rule? I suppose it's a rule. Yeah. I suppose it's a rule that if a Birchan speaks that way, it must be that's what this. At least the Smag seems to say. Okay, so far we had two explanations for why the halacha follows Hezek Riyah Shmei Hezek. Is Rabbi Yochanan, and because the questions that were in the middle of learning of the Gemara are deflected in their answers, not real answers. That's almost like a nice little Yishmaka Vart as to why the halacha is Hezek Riyah Shmei Hezek. So Oitz Machlazeh, another support to this idea that the Hezek Riyah is a damage. Because in many places in the Gemara it says this idea, the Ein HaBracha Shayra, that blessing does not reside only from something that's hidden from the eye. Something is concealed, that's when it brings the bracha. When something is flaunted, it doesn't have the bracha of the Eibishter.
Is that Ein Hara?
Oh, so Adam says the same thing. That's Ein Hara. So it's a similar inyan to Ein Hara. But in a minute, Tzemach Tzedek is going to quote a Medrash, a Rashi Medrash, which does use the language of Ein Hara. But the halacha related to it, as we'll see in a moment, it's not necessarily Ein Hara itself per se. It's a question of things that are concealed.
So whatever is concealed, the bracha stands more.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Ain't a bracha she'el ebel davar some mana'ayin. This is important. None of us here are Baruch Hashem in this shidduchim to know this. Tell the whole world about it. Ain't a bracha she'el davar some mana'ayin. Bracha that resides on that which is concealed from the eye, not just from other viewers. He says here, Perek HaMafkid, he cites the Perek HaMafkid and Torah Shulchan Aruch, and the Gemara in Taimus. Those three locations all describe. The Gemara Mafkitz quotes the pasuk which says in Kisova, that Hashem should give you your bracha in your granary. Samach, I think it's a granary. It's a place where your silo, where you contain your grain. But Rashi there says that they're learning out the word asamecha also from the word samoy, which means concealed. So the Yitzhak Hashem has a bracha ba'asamecha, Hashem will give you the bracha in your concealedness, and that which is concealed. And you see that some of the quotes Tur Shulchan Aruch and Tainus, where there it's actually halacha that way. The halacha is about a certain bracha, a certain tefillah you make when you measure your grain in your silo. And the Shulchan Aruch says that once you've measured it, you can't make the bracha. You have to make the bracha before. Why? Because once you've measured it, it's been exposed already. And then you no bracha anymore. Because the bracha is only there when it's concealed. So that's why I'm saying lav dafka is it ein hara per se, because it's even concealed from you. You make the bracha before you measure it. Once you measure it, the bracha is not there anymore, and you can't make this tefillah that the Shulchan Aruch says to make.
Don't we have the same concept? I mean, the concept is technically machzis shekel. When we count a shekel, like when Am Yisrael, Moshe asked that everybody should give half a shekel, right? So you're counting there.
It's not an issue of counting. What do you mean?
Meaning when you count something, what you're saying is...
Well, actually, there's two lashonis, actually. That the bracha is not shared on that which is madud, that which is measured, and also the bracha in a bracha shared al dar some ayin. Both lashonis are there, actually.
Okay.
But over here is referring to dafka, this idea that the bracha is only shared on that which is concealed. And this is support for the idea that hezek riyah is a hezek. Because he's ruining the bracha by having his backyard exposed. Or his front yard. Then he quotes this idea, this medrash that Rashi quotes in the pasuk, that this first luchos were broken because it was given bepumbi, it was given publicly, and the second one was without the noise of the first. The second luchos not without the same fanfare as the first luchos, and therefore there's the bracha is there. So here the language, if I'm not mistaken, shalta by ina, an eye over there. The language of ein hara is applied. And then he says like this: "Ayin b'toisves, see toisves, the Manascha Savarua, top of the next page there. If you look in the text, if you look in the WhatsApp group, is the picture of the Tzemach Tzedek. The second picture, the Manascha Savarua, v'shoma with beis, the Manascha ve'ema. So the Savarua toisves that we saw, where toisves said that the ikar is the second lishna. The ikar is the lishna which says hezek rish mehezek. And what's the raya? Because the Gemara introduced the first opinion by saying svarua. They thought to say, meaning to say it's not the conclusion. Even the Gemara substantiates it. And the fact that the Gemara is going to say later svarua as introducing the other one is only because it did it the first time, not because it really is svarua, right? So which really means we have now 4 reasons why to paskin hezek rish mehezek. So that's the matzah that gave us. 2 from the goyis ma'amin, 2 from the smag because of the deflected answers. Number 1. Number 2, because Rabbi Yochanan passes that way. Number 3, tzemach tzedek's chiddush, because in a bracha shel el dever some ayin. The bracha is only there when it's concealed, and therefore you should put up a barrier so that your yard is concealed. And number 4, the svarua Tosafos says. But then he says, look at Tosafos amud beis ve'ema. What Tosafos says that the reason why the Gemara introduces the second reading of the word mechitza, right? Why does the Gemara first said mechitza means an actual wall, and that's normally what it's translated as. Then the Gemara asks, maybe mechitza means to divide the property. So Tosafos kind of asks, why introducing another reading? What's wrong with the first reading? So he says because of the deflected answers. So he's telling you to look at Tosafos where a similar thing is mentioned. And also see Piskei Tosafos, so Gimel Barosh Sif Siman Aleph, Siman Aleph, end of Siman Aleph, where they all pass in the same way. Now, this is where I told you to look at the text that I sent you. So let's look at all the things, and then we'll go back to the Tzemach Tzedek, because this Tzemach Tzedek, at least on the surface, just seems like he's collecting. It just seems like the Tzemach Tzedek's collecting psak dinim. The first thing he gave a chiddush here. The first paragraph he gave a chiddush a little bit. He added another reason for why to paskin hezek rish mehezek, because in a bracha shel eved over some ayin. So he added something. But in the next paragraph, it looks like he's just collecting things. So we have to think about why Tzemach Tzedek puts this here. Like His job is not to collect information. But okay, maybe there's some reasons. Let's look at the Rambam. The Rambam, you have it there in the WhatsApp also. Hilchah Shchenim, Law of Shchenim, chapter 2, Halacha Yud Daled, Halacha 14. There the Rambam writes, Chatzer HaShutfin, a courtyard that belongs to partners, Shesh Badin Chalukah. There's enough for each of the two partners to have 4 amas. So then one neighbor can compel the other neighbor to split. Right? I'm not bound to remain in partnership with you. So I can compel you, okay, we're splitting, as long as each person can have 4 amas. Or Shechaluka Bertzainim, or they both acquiesced and agreed to split the property. If it was less than 8 amas, less than 4 amas each, and that's the case of our Mishnah, which is why it says Rotzi, that's why it says there that they both wanted, we require both of their consent because it's less than 4 amas each. Right? So this is the answer to the question there, that the Mishnah is not saying exclusively when it's less than 4 each, but even when it's less than 4 each. Okay. So yesh l'chol echad, each one has the capacity. Man, each of the two have the capacity to compel his friend, live as a to build a wall, but empty in the middle. So that his friend shouldn't see him when he's using his side of the property. Because hezek is hezek. And this is the quote that Tzemach Tzedek spoke about before. Now Tzemach Tzedek is about to address the next quote, which is, this is a new din, which we haven't learned, which is, the ein loy, where is it? No one can say, I have a chazaka in the chatzar. What do you mean by chazaka? What does it mean, I have a chazaka? Ella, meaning, even though we spent years and years as neighbors, and we never had a wall. The two of us, for 10 years, we've been neighbors without a wall. Right now I decided I want to have a wall. I could compel you to build a wall. At any time I want. So if I come to my neighbor and I tell him, we've been neighbors for 10 years, we had no wall, and I cut my neighbor and I say, I want to build a wall now. The other neighbor could argue to me and say, look, I have a chazaka that we have no wall. It's been like this for 10 years and you never protested. So I have a chazaka, right? When there's a lack of protest, there's a chazaka in halacha. For example, there's a law of squatting in halacha. Someone squats in an apartment, in your apartment, for 3 years, and 3 years consecutively you have not protested his living there. He has a chazaka, right? Or chazaka, more broadly speaking, is when somebody is living in a house, we don't assume he stole it. He's there, right? Especially if he's been there for 3 years, we don't assume he stole it. So I have a chazaka by dint of the fact that it's been like this for so long. It says that no chazaka. And therefore, even 10 years down the line, we've been living without a wall, I can compel you to build a wall. Okay, so what's the svara? What's the reason? Why? It's a good, the chazaka l'chora is a good, the chazaka is l'chora good. I have a chazaka that I don't have a wall. Now all of a sudden you're ruining my property, ruining my view. So now we have 3 different reasons for why there is a chazaka, why there's no chazaka. 1 from the Maggid Mishnah and 2 from the Rosh, and that's the Tzemach Tzedek tells us. The Tzemach Tzedek just says, look at the Rambam's Psak, look at the Maggid Mishnah, look at the Rosh. That's all he really says. And the question is, why does the Rambam Tzemach Tzedek do that? And ulai, maybe the reason why he does that is because what he told you before, that Eina Bracha She'el Samana Ayin, is another reason why years later I can compel you to build a wall. So it's a 4th reason. In addition to the reason that we're about to learn now, 1 from the Maggid Mishnah and 2 from the Rosh, the Tzemach Tzedek is dropping the line before to tell you that this is another reason why you have no chazaka, because you're ruining my bracha. If this is ruining a bracha, it overrides, as it were, maybe the chazaka. Ulai, maybe that's why Tzemach Tzedek is putting this here. But let's see the Maggid Mishnah as it's collected in the. It's kishmak a little Indian, and then we'll look at the Tzemach Tzedek, and then we'll go back to the Gemoro. So the Maggid Mishnah writes like this. You have it there. Maggid Mishnah is an early edition. We don't know much about this edition. We know that I think he's Ashkenazic, if I'm not mistaken, Germany. He's an early edition. We don't know much about his life. It's a funny thing. I know that we don't know much about his life, but other people, I don't know anything about them. And I'm sure people do know things. But anyway, Maggid Mishnah, early halacha commentary on the Rambam. It's a Rishon, which is unusual. A Rishon, it's a commentary, not an Achre. It's a Rishon commenting another Rishon. Okay. So says the Maggid Mishnah, the opinion of the Rambam is Kadas Rabbi is like the opinion of his Rebbe, of his teacher, which I believe is the Rif. I believe it's the Rif. Unless it's the Rif Magash, but I think it's the Rif. I looked this up before, but let's see. Says they're looking at Beis and Beis, correct? Oh, you don't have the text. Let's see. Beis and Beis. Okay. No, I don't see it in the. I don't see it in the. I don't see it in the Rif, so I'm not really sure then. No, I don't see it in the Rif. But anyway, okay. Says the Maggid Mishnah that the Rambam's opinion is like the opinion of his Rebbe. The Bechotzer, the Dafka, that in a Chotzer specifically, she'ein le chazaka, where the person doesn't have a chazaka. Why is there no chazaka? So all the Rambam said is that we don't consider the fact that he's been living this way for the last 10 years. That all is a chazaka. But what's that svara? Why no chazaka? Says the second Maggid Mishnah, Mishum, because the memela hin mazikin zeze, because each are actively damaging each other. There's an irony here. I'm continuously damaging my friend without taking even one action. Just by being there. I'm damaging him. I'm ruining his property just by being there without even doing anything. And therefore, my stationary, the fact that I've always had no wall is not a chazaka, considering the fact that I'm continuously always automatically damaging you. So you can't tell someone that I have a chazaka to hit you in the face all the time. There's no such thing. Just because I did you 10 times, if I have a chazaka, I'm allowed to hit you. So I'm continuously always automatically damaging you. So the damage is continuous. So what are you going to say as a chazaka now? It doesn't work that way. And therefore, there's no chazaka in this sense. Even if they live this way for 3 years without a wall, or yoser more, so then no chazaka. But they didn't act. Going, for example, I have a wall from my house going to your backyard, going to your yard, and then I cut out a window. Then I opened it up, so I took an action. Now, as an action I took. Now, you as a neighbor have the ability to protest my act. Then there is a chazaka, even according to the Rambam and his Rebbe's opinion. He's in Perek Zayin, and in Perek Zayin, we're going to see these laws that if a person has a house and he opens up a window to his neighbor, then the neighbor can come and tell him, close that window. I don't like the fact that you're seeing me all the time. So the Maggid Mishnah gives a reason for why no chazaka is because no action is taken to make the damage. It's just the passive damage is continuously happening, and that doesn't allow for chazaka. Chazaka is if I take an action and you don't protest the action, now there's a chazaka. Yeah, I don't know. Like if I'm actively looking at the guy's house in the WhatsApp chat, you'll see there looking at the Rashi now there. What's this? Sorry? Basra. Look at the WhatsApp group of the Wednesday of the Shiur, and you'll see there I posted the texts. Yes, I don't know if the guy's taking an action like he's popping his head out to constantly look, and the guy never protests. I wonder if that counts as an action. I don't know. Okay, so that was reason number one for why is no chazaka. Let's see the Rashi now. The Rash So you have it in the WhatsApp group. If you're looking at the Gemoro, it's
all the text is all in the group.
Oh, it's exclusively?
Just for
you're on the group, aren't you?
Yeah, but
So here, take this. Here, you have to read it here.
I can't get a text version of it? It's not possible?
Go print it in his office now. Take it. Here, it'll be quicker. It's just that text there. Okay, that text right there. So it is Bays. So says the Rosh. The Shutfin shecholkos achatzer, partners that split their property. And they didn't build a wall between the two of them. And after many years, one of the two neighbors demand or ask that there should be a wall built. And the other neighbor responds by saying, you've already forgiven me on the damage that I'm doing by looking at your property, that I'm damaging you, and you've given me the rights, or you sold me the rights. And the proof is that I have a chazaka for many years to looking into your property. It says the Rosh, ain't taina se taina. The taina is not a taina. You sold me the rights. I claim that you sold me the rights. I paid you. I paid you X amount of dollars, and you sold me the rights to be able to see into your property. Or yes, but I have no proof of it other than the chazaka. It's not like I have a contract. I have a contract with something else. But I have the proof is the exactly boy that I've been living this way, kamashanim, with it for many years. It says the Rosh ain't taina se taina, no taina. Why no taina? You cannot say that there's a chazaka here. Why? The time of the chazaka, the reason for a chazaka. So the reason the Mishnah gave is because there's continuous damage going on automatically. I never took an act against which you should protest. It's continuously happening. So the Rosh now gives a different reason. Why? The time of the chazaka, the reason for a chazaka, hainu, this is given the shasak v'loy micha, because someone's quiet in the face of something in the face of damage that I'm doing, and he didn't protest. Hifsid, he lost out. For example, a squatter. I squatted in someone's apartment, or not me. Somebody squatted in somebody else's apartment, and the owner didn't protest for 3 years, so he didn't protest against the act. So no, he doesn't. So he loses his chazaka, and the squatter now gets the chazaka. But hainu dafka, this is only heichasham magzik. This is when the person who is taking this chazaka, the person who's doing the squatting, let's say, who mazik, is a damager. Remember, we said that mem is macht, nun is nemt, making or taking. The mem is making the damage. So Shamazik, the one who is holding on to the property here, who mazik, he's the one that's making the damage. The Einanizik, but he's not getting damaged. That's right. For example, the example we gave before is a squatter. A squatter is the mazik, he's sitting in the house, and he's the mazik, he's damaging the other guy because he's living in the other guy's house. Which case? What's the roof case? Oh, so that's one example. But here is a different example for the same thing. If I have a window that's open to my friend's yard, right? So I am not being damaged by my friend because he can't see into my window, but I am damaging him. Then I can say chazaka. But in our case, they can say the person who could say like this. Let's go back and forth in the tinus. One guy says, build a wall. Neighbor A, this is 10 years they've been living without a wall, and neighbor A says build a wall. Neighbor B says, we've been living this way for 10 years. What do you want from me? No chazaka. So neighbor A says back, why would I protest the lack of wall more than you? You're blaming me for not protesting against the lack of wall. It's not my responsibility to protest against the lack of wall. If I was the only one getting damaged, it's my responsibility to protest against the wall. But I was damaging you as much as you were damaging me. And I was waiting around. Maybe you'll decide to build a wall one day. Why is the onus? In other words, the Rosh is seeing that saying that you have to protest the chazaka is like an obligation you're putting on someone's shoulders, right? And why do I carry the burden of protesting the chazaka more than you? I'm getting damaged. You're getting damaged. So this is reason number 2 for why the chazaka doesn't work years later. So reason number 1 is Magid Mishnah, because there's no action. It's constantly happening. There's no action for which to protest. And reason number 2 from the Rosh is, the reason number 1 in the Rosh, the reason number 2 we're collecting here from the Tzemach Tzedek is that the damage is going both ways. And therefore, the onus of protesting is not on me, it's on you too. And therefore, the fact that I didn't protest is not a proof that I'm acquiescing. It just meant that I was waiting for you to say something. And now it's been 5 years, you haven't said something, I decided it's time to say something. But it's not because I actually relinquished my rights to having a wall. Reason number 2. Reason number 3. Additionally, another reason why the damage incurred upon two neighbors that don't have a wall is not the same as a damage happening between someone who owns a house and has a window looking into somebody else's property. The Hassam over there in the home, if I have a window open in my home to your property, Lav has a tadru. It's not like as if I'm standing by my window 24/7 staring into your property. Right? I walk around my house. The window is made not because I want to look out, because I want light to come into my home. I didn't build the wall. I'm not a peeping, what do they call it? It's like I built a window to look out. I built it for light to come in. Now, the and it's forbidden for me to look at the actions of my friends, like we say by Agina. I think he's referring to the fact that by Agina, there's the issue of Ein Hara, which we learned last week, right? Does he not stand in your, is that what he's referring to? That's what he's referring to. So it's forbidden for me to stand there and look at you. So, but the window is not as if like it's a continuous damage. The fact that my window is there is not 24/7 ruining your property. But a yard, which is used as an entry and exit way, right? So remember the old days, we're talking about a bunch of homes, or 2 homes in this case, that are built around a shared courtyard, and they walk in from the street through that courtyard. So there's constantly traffic. I'm constantly walking in and out of the yard. And it's impossible that I'm not going to see what my friend's doing. It's not a certainty that I'm going to be seeing from my window what my neighbor's doing. But it is a certainty that when I walk in and out of my house, I'm going to see what my neighbor's doing. See, I had this experience. I share a walkway with my neighbor. When I'm walking up and down, I can't not see on his side of the stairs. I can't. We share a deck on top, what they call it, the gallery. It's impossible for me not to see what's going on in his gallery. But from my window, I'm certainly going to see what my neighbor in the backyard is doing. Well, dafka. But when I walk in and out of the house continuously, I'm for certainly going to see onto his side of the yard. And therefore, this damage is not similar. The damage that's incurred between 2 neighbors that don't have a wall in their front yard is not to be compared to a window that's overlooking somebody else's yard, but rather should be compared to Lukutra, I think you should pronounce it, Ubeis HaKisei. Damin Lakaman, where we say Kutra Ubeis HaKisei is a person who's making smoke and a bathroom. So if I have a bathroom in a certain location, right, and it's disturbing to somebody else, or I have a smoke, I'm constantly making, I'm smoking meat or something like that. I'm constantly producing smoke in a certain location. I can't claim chazaka and say the fact that my bathroom smells and damages you, not my business. Because these are the kinds of things that are so terrible that it's not fair kind of thing. The Mila Kamon, we say later, the less do chazaka. There's no chazaka that the Gemoro is going to say in Daf Chav Gimel. Therefore, because the damage is continuous, therefore you can't say chazaka. The chazaka doesn't exist, and therefore they have to build a wall even years later. This is reason number 3. 3.
The reason is because you're constantly going to be seeing.
It's correct.
Like what we talked about the stuff there,
like Rav Tashmish, like Rashi said, that Rav Tashmish is machasi. It's the same thing. Interesting. Maybe Rashi means Rav Tashmish, and that's where you sit around and sunbathe and hang out with your children. Yeah, if you can turn the heater, by the way, that wasn't on purpose. I didn't turn on. No, it's not on. It wasn't on purpose. I didn't turn it on. You can turn it on if you'd like. Okay, so let's see the Tzemach Tzedek, where he kind of just collects the words of the Rambam, the Maggid Mishnah, and the Rosh. So let's see it inside, and we'll conclude with that. We'll go to the Gemara. So it's the second picture there in the WhatsApp group that I posted. The Rambam states further. Show him over there in the same halacha which we quoted earlier. Earlier we quoted the halacha that the Rambam writes that hezek is a hezek, and there he added an extra nuance, an extra reason for why we pass in that way, because in a bracha that the bracha only resides in that which is concealed, and therefore it's another reason that she built a wall. Then the Rambam writes in that same halacha, and we read this earlier, the ein lechazaka chulu. One neighbor doesn't have a chazaka to say that I've been living the last 10 years without a wall. You can't compel me, right? The Kosav Rav Magid, and the Maggid Mishnah writes, which we read, mishum meila chulu, because the damage happens automatically and continuously, without the person taking any act for which the other person should should protest. But if I did take an action, for example, I cut out a wall of my house and now looks into your yard, then there's a specific action taken at a specific point in time, and then the neighbor has a certain amount of time to protest before I can say I have a chazaka. So I think it's 3 years. Look at halachas. He says, oh, the action is once, yeah. I took the action once. And once taking the action, you have a certain amount of time before you do the chazaka. I think it's a few years, 3 years, whatever it is. Okay. It says, Perek Zayin halacha vav. Right, the Maggid Mishnah told us that these halachas are going to be dealt with in Perek Zayin. So they're not, Tzemach Tzedek says, look it up. Then the Tzemach Tzedek says, V'arosh Siman Beis, the Rosh Siman Beis, which we just finished reading, Kosav Tamacher. You have another reason for why there's no chazaka. The time of the chazaka, because the reason for chazaka is always when the person who's holding on to the chazaka is doing the damage, but not taking damage. Going, for example, me, etc. Like, for example, the one who cuts out a window, which I am giving the damage, but not taking any damage. And this is the halacha, this is Tzemach Tzedek speaking, this is the law that the Rambam is going to write in chapter 7, halacha 6, which states that if a friend opened up a window and the neighbor forgave him, or he revealed, for example, if I came and helped my neighbor build a window, then it means I'm forgiving it, or I knew about it and I didn't protest. So it doesn't say how long. It says that as soon as I know about it and I don't protest, I'm already forgiven. Then I have a chazaka. So that's the halacha of the Rambam. Same thing as the Rosh. Now, Avahacha, but here, this is now the Tzemach Tzedek still quoting the Rosh. But here, where each is damaging each other, there's no chazaka. Because I can't say, I can counter argue and say that the reason why I didn't protest is because I was expecting you to protest. Because they're both equally giving and receiving damage. And therefore, I was damaging you in the same way you were damaging me, etc. He's still quoting the Rosh. Additionally, that the case of two neighbors without a wall is more similar to smoke in a bathroom, which are so disturbing and so continuously disturbing that there's no chazaka, unlike a window, which is not so disturbing, and therefore a chazaka happens. So it seems like the Tzemach Tzedek is just collecting a bunch of reasons, right? That's all he does here. Like, what does he add here? Except for the only thing he has is the parentheses where he says that the Rambam's thing is the same thing as the Rambam's, that the Rosh's Kagoin me is the same thing as the Rambam's halacha. It's the only thing he adds. Otherwise, what's he adding? So it could be just his notes, and that's why he's just writing in his notes, or it could be that he's saying that the reason he gave before of Eina Bracha Davar Samanayim is another support for why the chazaka doesn't work. This chazaka doesn't stand in the way of a bracha. Maybe. There's no reason, there's nowhere in the Tzemach Tzedek he says that. I'm just suggesting perhaps. Okay, so there's still other pieces in the Tzemach Tzedek, but maybe some other time we'll come back to these pieces in the Tzemach Tzedek. But it feels that Slabavich Chassidim, that was wanted, so I think it's a good thing to learn from Rabbi. Okay, there's also, I saw in, there's Zelixin, Rabbi Michal Zelixin wrote a mafteach, an index of all the Rebbe's Torah. And one of the, there's a bunch of, it's a whole fat book. It's just the whole thing is just an index of all the Rebbe's teachings. And at the end, he has an index that goes through Shas, and where the Rebbe mentions Shas. I looked up our pages. There's a few things that Rebbe, there's a few times that Rebbe talks about our Gemara. Haven't looked it up yet, but in Mitzvah Shem I will. Maybe we'll learn tomorrow night or next week. But one thing I did see that Rebbe said is Beruchnias on HaShutfin Shiratzim. Neighbors that want to, neighbors, Shutfin, proper Shutfin are ones that Ratzilas, they want to help each other. And because neighbors want to help each other, Boinin is a kaisel, they build a wall. But what kind of wall? Gvil Gazis. And Gvil is associated with the Bris Midrash. So when there's Shutfin, when neighbors, when people are friends, and they're in a manner of Ratzu, they're in a manner of shared consent, they want to help each other, it leads to the Gvil, to the building of the Bris Midrash. So that I saw the Rebbe says in the line on base. Okay, I'm going to look up the other things that they write there in the index, Rebbe's comments in this Gemara, and we'll share them. God willing. Okay, let's go back to the Gemara on Beis Amud Beis. So let's quickly review what we learned last week. Oh, so you have the Gemara there ready now.
Yeah.
So Let's quickly review what we learned last week. And this week we'll learn first the Rashi, and then we'll go to the Tosafos, and we'll try to see them differently instead of going back and forth. Okay, so the Gemara said, the Mishnah said, the wall is to be built in the middle, etc. The Gemara asked a simple question, Pshita, it's obvious. Where else would you build a wall? Build a wall in the middle, of course. Where else would you build a wall? Answer the Gemara, it's not so simple. There is a scenario in which I might have thought the wall should not be built in the middle. How's that? The Kadam Chad V'Ratzeh Lechavere, where one of the two partners, one of the two neighbors, went ahead and appeased his friend before. Meaning to say, whatever the consent is, the consent didn't go two directions. It went one direction. One friend, Kadim, came earlier, V'Ratzeh Lechavere, and appeased his other friend. And then the consent was born out of that. It was born out of one neighbor asking the other neighbor to join, whatever he's asking him to join him with. But he's asking them to join, as opposed to two neighbors coming together. And therefore, because one neighbor is asking of the other to come to join, so I might have thought that the neighbor who was convinced into it might respond by saying, when did I agree with you to do this thing called building a wall? Bavira, I agreed to allow that this wall is going to prevent the air or my visual. That's what I didn't mind. But betashmishi, but to diminish the size of my property, which is already small because it's less than 4 amas each, because they require both consent. Lo yisratzilach, I did not agree to that. And Kamash Malan, therefore the Mishnah comes and tells us and says, no, you have to build in the middle anyway. So just looking at the Gemara simply before we get to Rashi and Tosafos, simply the Gemara's the Chiddush is, what's the Chiddush of build the wall, the statement build a wall in the middle, which seems to be obvious. Where else do you build a wall? The simple Chiddush is under a circumstance when the agreement, the Gemara doesn't specify what the agreement is, but the agreement between them wasn't mutual to begin with. One began the process with the other, and therefore the other argues and says, my consent was because of what you told me, and I misunderstood what you wanted. I only wanted so much, not so far. I only wanted to give up the ear space. I only wanted to give up the visual of the wall there, but I wasn't consenting to giving up space in my property for the wall. Right? So, sorry? Clear? What? No, it's clear?
Oh.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, that's the Gemara right now. The only change in the Gemara is that it's not mutual consent, but it's mutual consent, but the mutual consent began with one. That's the Chiddush here. The Kadam Achad V'Ratzeh Lechavere. One began the process by convincing his friend to join. And therefore the one who was convinced can argue and say, I didn't agree to so much. Okay, but now let's find out, what are the details of this? What are the details of what the friend asked for? And what's the details of what the other friend is saying, I consented to, but not so much? What are the details of those things? What's the details of what he asked for? And what's the details that he thinks he consented to? Which the Mishnah is saying, no, once you consent to the whole thing, and you have to build in the middle. Okay. So that's where Rashi and Tosafos are going to split. So let's see Rashi. Or at least the Chorah they split. So Rashi says, right? The Chiddush din is, when the consent didn't come mutually, the consent came from one to the other. Kadam Chad, one came first and went ahead. And one of them went and appeased his friend. He convinced him to join him. So what did he ask him to do? He asked of him to split the property with a wall. So what did I ask for? Just a simple Rashi. What did the partner come and ask for? Let's split the property with a wall, with a partition, with a mechitza. So what's clear in the request is, number one, we're splitting property. That's clear in the request. And number two, that the split's going to have a partition. But the details of the partition aren't clear. And therefore the other guy can say, the details of the partition to be halfway between our properties, I never agreed to. I only agreed to other details. What are those other details? So it says like this, I might have thought, Omar Lei, the one who got convinced, can respond and say, now we're looking at Rashi. When I agreed to you, when I consented to you to build the wall, so Rashi drops the chalukah part. He doesn't say anymore the chalukah. In other words, the chalukah is fine. I agreed to split. There's no argument there. The argument is, you said you want to split with a wall. And I agreed to that. So the splitting part is splitting. We split the property 50-50. There's nothing to argue about. But that detail called the wall, I didn't consent to it the way you're imagining it, where it's 50-50 halfway, and we're building this 4 tefachim wide wall. But I only agreed, mechitza daka, a thin mechitza. Nisratzi is what I agreed to. And the thin wall will prevent the air from coming into my property, or the visual, or my view. Going, for example, a wall made of boards, shidaka, which is very, very thin. The hezekriya ainba. And if you, my neighbor, are concerned with hezekriya, it's not there anymore. You're not going to see through. Or if you insist on building a bigger wall, let the majority of the thickness of the wall be on your side, except for a small little bit amount on my wall, on my side. But to make a very thick wall, and it's going to be 50-50, that way it's going to prevent me from enjoying the entirety of my property because I'm now losing 3 tvachim. That far I didn't consent to. So let's break it down in Rashi's opinion. The original request of the friend is, right, because the Gemoro says that the mutual consent didn't start off together both, it came from one to the other. And therefore the one had one thing in mind, and the other is arguing had something else in mind. So what did the original guy have in mind? He had in mind split with a partition. And the other guy says, no problem, split, I'm okay. Partition, I'm also okay. But I'm not okay. And Rashi also adds, I'm also okay giving a little bit of space for that wall. It's a detail that Rashi adds here, right? It's right. He doesn't say put the whole thing on your side. That's right. So I consent to put, because what did you ask me? You asked me to split with a wall. When you say the word let's split with a wall, implied there is that I'm sharing some of the space for the wall. Right? So I did consent to what you said, but the details of what you said I didn't. What you had in mind I didn't consent to. So what did you say? The other guy said, let's split with a partition. So I have to have consented to some space. L'chora, that's why Rashi's adding that. So I have to have consented to some space because it implied in what you asked for is a split with a wall. But the dent.
I think your agreement to do it on my own property. I wanted a wall.
Maybe. Yeah. Which would further support the line of reasoning that Rashi is learning that this Gemara is asking about the opinion of Hezek Resh Hezek. Which is why, let's finish it up and we'll get to the point. So let's walk it through. So the original guy says, let's split with a partition. We're in the Rashi. It's the left-hand column. So the original friend says, let's split with a partition. The other guy says, no problem. So I have to agree to a split, no problem. I also have to agree to a partition. So I'm okay giving at least a little bit of space of my property for the partition. And I'm okay the fact that the partition is going to ruin my airflow because that's what's implied in the word partition. But I'm not okay with giving 3 tvachim for the wall. And if you want a 4 tvachim wall, make it on your side. Or just use boards. Okay. So Adam is adding that if I'm consenting to, what was the words?
Consenting to, you don't need my consent for a wall if you're going to build it on your property.
The reason why Adam's adding like this, it's a very geschmack of words. That the reason why Rashi insists, this is a very good word. The reason why Rashi insists that I'm consenting to at least a little bit of the wall is because if the issue was, if you want to build a wall on your side, I can't stop you. If I consent to split, right? But that's only true if Hezek Reish Mehezek. Right. So which means let's just learn Rashi this way. This is what I think Rashi is learning. If the Gemara's question that's obvious is in accordance with the view that Hezek Reish Mehezek. And if Hezek Reish Mehezek, of course you're building a wall in the middle. Where else? You're damaging each other. But now the argument to the friend is, you asked for splitting with a wall, and I consented to it. But if you're going to make me go this far, that I have to give up so many tvachim, I'm retracting not just the building wall consent, but I'm retracting the consent to split the cloud. Right? Because if you want to prevent hezekri, which is not my business, build it on your side. You want me to give up some of my property and have this wall put up? No problem. And also, you need my consent to split. L'cholka, to split, you need my consent, because you can't split without my consent also, because it's less than 4 tvachim each. This is l'chura what's happening in Rashi, which explains why Rashi adds the word l'cholka, not bikish menu livnois koiso, livnois mechitza, bikish menu l'cholka, bim mechitza. And Rashi adds in the second Rashi of hezekriya einba, and as Adam points out, it would add flavor to why Rashi insists that I'm okay with giving away a little bit. Okay. So let's now see Tosafos, who learns the Gemara differently. if this is the correct reading in Rashi, which I can see going other ways, but let's just assume this is the right reading in Rashi. Let's just do the pluses and minuses of learning this way in Rashi on the most pashtistic level. The plus of learning this way in Rashi is the language in Rashi himself. Oh, but moreover, also, why would Rashi choose this way? L'chura, we could say the reason why Rashi chooses this way is because this question is split from the questions that are about to follow. I mean, the Gemara is about to go on to give a bunch of questions.
Still in the mode of deliberating.
But that's the downside. The downside is that the Gemara just finished substantiating the view that Hezek Yalash Mehezek. Now the Gemara is asking the question about Hezek Yalash Mehezek. How would you do that? On the other hand, the Gemara is about to introduce 5 questions on Hezek Yalash Mehezek. So why don't just have this in the list, 6? Even though you can split and say that the next rayas are rayas from Mishnah, it's not rayas from the actual lashon of the Mishnah. You can split. Wait, look, you can see going both either direction. Okay, so let's see Tosafos. It's on the bottom right. The wall is built by in the middle. Pshita, it's obvious. So Tosafos says explicitly who the Gemara is asking the question on. Lamando Amar Guda Parach. The Gemara is asking in accordance with the opinion that says that what they consented to build is a wall, right? HaShutfin sherotzu lasis mechitza. Shutfin partners that consented to build, to make a partition, to make a mechitza. And there are 2 ways to learn what the word mechitza means. Either mechitza means let's split property. So the consent is not on the wall, the consent is in the split property. And then the building of the wall comes because of another issue, which is Hezek. However, there's the other way of reading, which is the partner's consent, Ratzu Lases, is their consent is to build the actual wall, not the splitting. The splitting could have been not the consent. It could have been one compelled the other because it's such a big property. But now they consented to build a wall. And if they consented to build a wall, that's the only reason why they should build one, which means there is no such thing as Hezek, because otherwise I can't force them. I need their consent to build a wall, right? If I need their consent to build a wall, it means Hezek is not a Hezek. Because otherwise, why do I need both consent to build a wall? Even one guy's enough to compel the other. So if the reading of the Mishnah is if the word mechitza means a wall, then that means what the partners consent to, Rasis Lats mechitza, is they wanted to build a wall. That means Hezek is not Hezek. And that's why I require the consent to build a wall. And that's Guda Parach, that's the opinion the Gemara is asking about Pshita. Just like the rest of the questions. Why is it split with the parentheses? I don't know. And maybe that's why Rashi says it doesn't go according to this opinion. But Tosafos is saying that the questions about to ask now is just in line with the rest of the questions that are about to follow. The Gemara is now going to raise 6 questions on the opinion that says Lash Mehezek, and this is the 7th one. Just like all the questions about to follow. Now, why is it so pshita in this opinion? Why is it more obvious? Right? The Gemara's question is that it's obvious to build in the middle. Why is it so obvious that when 2 people consent, they have to build in the middle? The answer is right there, because they consented. Because the Gemara says that the consent to build a wall is not just a verbal consent. They made a kinyan. They did an actual action of acquisition. Right? They bound each other by law to build that wall. The when they made a kinyan to make a wall, this was their agreement. This was their acquisition. Each one should do exactly like the other. That's what the agreement is. And therefore, it's obvious. And they have to build it in the middle.
That was expressed at the time of the kinyan.
Yeah, that's what's obvious. If they made a kinyan, this was the kinyan. So it's obvious that it's in the middle. Okay, so that's Tosafos. Before we get to the next part of Tosafos, Tosafos doesn't explain this. Now we understand. Let's go through the question now in our Tosafos opinion. We're reading according to the opinion that Hezek is not a Hezek. And therefore, in order to build a wall, we need both their consent. And if it's both their consent, not just their consent, but they had a kinyan in their consent, then obviously they have to build a wall in the middle because you just consented to do so. So what's the Gemara's answer? Because you consent that we're consenting that we're each going to take equal share in the building.
Unless you express otherwise, when you agree,
nobody would do that. No one would do otherwise.
But that's what the kinyan is. The kinyan is we're going to split 50-50. So split 50-50 means it's got to be in the middle, not just 50 cost, but 50-50 on space too.
That's what you assume the agreement.
Yeah. Unless you explicitly state otherwise. But right. So then the question becomes, what's the Gemara's answer? What's the Gemara's answer? The Kadam Chad Asr Chavere. So what? I made a kinyan. What's the Gemara's answer? In Rashi, we see an answer, right? Because they never made a kinyan on building a wall. I agreed to split property with you, which by default meant to build a wall because of Hezek Re'iyah. And then I could say, look, when I split with you, I wasn't expecting to make this whole massive wall. I was expecting to prevent Hezek Re'iyah, no problem. But not so far, not so much. Okay, so Rashi has a back and forth here. But in Tosafos, his pshita is so strong that what's the Gemara's answer? I don't know the answer yet. Maybe something, we'll see it from the second half of Tosafos. But at this point, this is the Shvedakite in Tosafos. Unless you're going to say that in the same way Tosafos said before, that all the answers the Gemara is going to give in the next 6 questions are deflections. And the Tosafos just told you that this question is another one of these questions we're going to pile onto the list. So the Gemara is a deflective answer. But even a deflective answer has to have some beef, has to have some substance, has to have some argument. So what's the argument here? Why would the Kadam Rad V'chatz L'Chaver, right? That's what we broke down the Gemara. The Gemara's Chiddush is that one person, that the consent wasn't mutual simultaneously, but one came first. One person came ahead and appeased his friend. Why does it change anything? We made a kinyan. Tosafos' pshita is a very, very strong pshita, which makes it almost harder to understand the Gemara's answer.
Why can't the kinyan just be to that part of the avir and not the land?
So that means the kinyan wasn't explicit.
Yeah.
So in other words, the kinyan, let's walk through that. So the Gemara is saying like this. The kinyan is that we're going to split a wall. And the type of wall, I didn't know what it was going to be. Right?
Tosafos is saying, well, too bad.
But too bad.
Because you didn't say otherwise, then
yeah.
Then it's equal.
Then it's equal. Because you didn't say otherwise, it's equal. Even though Zek Moizeh, because Zek Moizeh still remains.
That's the kinyan has the effect of Zek Moizeh because you didn't say anything else.
No, Zek Moizeh is even in the pshita. The pshita is because Zek Moizeh. Right? So in other words, Rashi's idea that says that when I consented, I thought, look, I'll give you a little bit for the wall, but you take the rest of it. Tosafos can't say that because there's a Zek Moizeh in the kinyan. But what Moshe is arguing is, and this is a good one. It's a good response. That the Zek Moizeh that I thought of when you asked for it was for a thin, not for a thick one. But there's never a havmina that should be built on full on your property, and there's never a havmina that should be built more on your part than my property. It's clearly 50-50. But the Zek Moizeh was a thinner one, not the bigger one. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And this only happens because Kadam Chad V'Ratz L'Chavere. If they came mutually together, see, why does it come down to Kadam Chad V'Ratz L'Chavere? Why is that the problem? If they're making a kinyan, right? Unless
the other guy just came to him, he wasn't part of his plan. He just
right. So maybe that's what I was thinking. Like Kadam Chad V'Ratz L'Chavere means that one neighbor came to the other and said, look, it's a hassle, I know, just agree to it, I'll handle everything, and we'll just split it 50-50, I'll take care of everything. And then I found out he's building this massive structure. And I said, hold on a second, I don't think this is going to happen. Maybe that's kind of what it is. So maybe, and then, okay, so this is a response, but it's not a deflection. It's not a strong response, but a couple of them it's a response, so maybe we can say that. Okay. So this is all Tosafos explaining how he is learning the Gemara. And he's learning the Gemara is asking the question on the opinion that says Guda, which says, Hezekiah lash me hezek, and therefore it's pshita because we did a kinyan. And if you did a kinyan, it's Zek Moizeh. And if it's Zek Moizeh, then obviously it's 50-50. What's the shaila of Be'emtza? And comes the answer, as we're learning it now, as Moshe suggested, that the answer is the Zek Moizeh, we thought it was much smaller. And the reason why we think it's smaller is because you convinced me and you're going to handle all the issues. This is how we're understanding the Gemara and Tosafos reading. But now let's see why Tosafos says not to read the other way. Why does Tosafos say don't read the other way? Why can't you learn the Gemara Pshita to mean that it's on the opinion that says Hezek Reish Mehezek, as we've been understanding in Rashi? But in accordance to the opinion that says that when the Mishnah says the word mechitza, which means when the two people, the two partners consented to make a mechitza, what did they consent to? They consented to split property. They never consented to build a wall. And now they're being compelled to build a wall because of hezek riyah. So over here says Rashi, says Tosafos, over here, it's not pshit at all that you have to build in the middle. Why is it not pshit at all that you would build in the middle? It's required to say that didn't bonus a koisa b'emtzeh. It's required to say that to build a wall in the middle, where they consented to split and hezek riyah shmei hezek, and the wall is coming up because of the consent, but the wall is coming because of the law, which is hezek riyah, or because one person's compelling the other to stop hezek riyah. So why is it not pshit that you build in the middle? Because you would need it lememar to tell us. I might have thought because of hezek riyah. Yes, in other words, we consented to split. Fine, we're splitting. Now you come to me and say, I don't want you to see my property. So my response to you is, no problem. I'll help you. I'll help you building the wall. You can't compel me to give up my property. You know what it is? This is saying I could argue and say, you can compel me to pay to stop me from damaging you. But to compel me to give up my property to stop you from damaging you, I can't do that. In other words, I don't care for the damage. Right. I'm fixing the problem. You have a problem and it's being caused by me. So I'll pay my share of fixing the problem. But I don't have to give up my property for that. So therefore, it's not pshit at all that you should build it halfway down. Right? So there's another difference in Rashi and Tosafos. Because in Tosafos' opinion, the Havamina, if you learn hezek riyah shmei hezek, the Havamina without the Gemara saying, if the Gemara had not said the words there's a Havamina to think that the person who doesn't care for hezek riyah doesn't give any property. Whereas Rashi said, at least of Amut I would give. Because when I agreed to split, it comes along with mechitza, like you were saying. And because I agreed to split the property and chalukah comes with mechitza, so I have to consent. Just in the fact that I consented to split is enough to consent to give you at least something for the wall. In the Havamina, even Rashi is saying, no matter how you slice this Gemara. But in the Havamina, in Rashi, I have to give at least something. Whereas in the Havamina and Tosafos, it would be nothing. If you were to learn the Gemara, the hezek riyah shmei hezek, which Tosafos is not to learn that way because it's so pshit, because it's not so pshita, because the counter argument is so good. Okay, hope that clarified this whole Gemara Rashi and Tosafos business. Okay, let's learn the next question. And then we'll stop over there. Okay, even though last week I went a little farther, but I'm happy we're doing this Chazara, it's good. Hope he's getting a little clarity here. Okay. So the Gemara now says, hezek riyah la shmei hezek. Are you suggesting that hezek riyah is not a hezek? See, this is another reason to learn like Tosafos. Like the Gemara is in the middle discussing the opinion and says la shmei hezek. But you took a brief break to talk about the other opinion. Strange. If that's how we're learning Rashi. But anyway, the Gemara asks, hezek riyah shmei hezek. Are you suggesting that hezek riyah is not a hezek? And then the Gemara says, Simon, a sign for the questions that are about to follow is 6 things. Gina, a garden. That's the first question is going to come from the law of the Gina. The second question is going to come from the law of the word the law of a koisel, a Mishnah which says koisel. And the third question is going to come from the word koifin, cholkin, chaloines, the Rab Nachman. So 6 questions are about to come. Right? Yeah. So let's see the first one. Tashma, come and listen. The first word, that's the first proof that seems to indicate that hezek riyah is a hezek. The Mishnah says, V'chein begina. Our Mishnah after concludes the law of the Chatzar, and it concludes the law. We're assuming now hezek riyah la shmei hezek. So the wall is being built because they both consented. And then the Mishnah goes on to say that once you consent to build a wall, you're compelled to follow the local custom of gazes, gvil, whatever the wall is, and you're each compelled to give the requisite amount of space in the yard and the requisite amount of money to pay for the bricks, etc. Then the Mishnah says, V'chein begina. The same thing is true of a gina, that in a place where the minig is to build a wall, the same law applies, right? So, how is this a question? These words, v'chein begina. The pashtus way you learn it is, this is the way Tosafos learns it, kind of, from the fact that the Mishnah says that when there's a minig to build a wall, you're compelled to build a wall. is a raya. Why? Because in the first clause by Chotzer, the building of the wall is dependent on Rotzu. It's dependent on their consent. Okay, so Lav Shmei Hezek, you need a consent to build a wall. But in the second clause, where that when there's no Makom Shnagu, I think even the word of the Mishnah says the word Machayvin. Yeah, same thing true in a Gina. Makom Shnagu Ligder, if the custom is to build a fence around the Gina, Machayvin, so you compel him. So now all of a sudden it's not Rotzu anymore, it's Machayvin. That's the core of the question, the pashtus. So what kind of machayvin if it's a question of consent? If lash me hezek, what's with the machayvin? L'chora it's rotzu only. So this is a raya that shmei hezek, that it is a hezek because we're compelling. Says the Gemara, no, gina shiny. A gina is different. It's not ordinarily hezek lash me hezek, but a gina is different. Why is a gina, a garden, different? Because the Rabbi Abba, like Rabbi Abba says, Rabbi Abba said, Omar Rabbi Abba, for Rabbi Abba said, Omar Rav. It's forbidden for a person to stand in the field by the field of his friend at the time when the field is in its full bloom, all the stalks are standing in its full height. It's usher at that point to stand and look at his field. Why? Let's see Rashi. This is the only Rashi on this question and answer. It's forbidden to a person to stand, etc. Why? So he should not damage it with an ayin hara. And therefore the Gemara is answering like this. That by a chatzir, what?
Yeah, the other thing might be it's almost like a source for one of the sources for ayin hara.
From Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek, yes. Yeah. Oh, that actually raises an interesting question. That just went off my head. Maybe we'll put that aside. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So the Gemara asked that l'chora by agina we see that you are compelled to build a wall machayvin oisa. Nothing to do with consent. Why are you saying that the hezek is not a hezek? L'chora we're compelling you to build a wall. Answers the Gemara. The Gemara's going to do that in a second. In a second, the Gemara's going to do that. In a second, we're going to do that. The Gemara's going to do that. Right now, we're saying splitting. That the din of Chatzir, the first clause in the Mishnah, is because Rotzu, is because they consented. They don't consent, no building a wall. But Begina, it's not because they consented, it's because there's Ein Hara problem, and therefore they're compelled to build a wall. So the Gemara is splitting at this point between Chatzir and Gina. Chatzir only with consent, because Hezek is not a Hezek, and Gina without consent because Ein Hara. That's what we're understanding the Gemara right now. Says the Gemara, but the Mishnah says, and also, says Rashi, the implication is that the law of the chatzir, because it said the word v'chein, and so too, and that means whatever reasons you're putting for why you're building the chatzir, why you're building the wall in the chatzir, the same logic applies to the gina. So don't tell me it's two different logics. That in the chatzir you're building because rotzu, because they consented. And Exactly. And because by Gina it says Machayvin, explicitly, you must say that in the first place also Machayvin. And what's the Ratzu? Ratzu Plukta. So the Saraish Mehezik. Because the Gemara says B'chein, which means whatever logic you're compelling the person to build a wall in the Gina is the same logic for the Chatzir. So don't tell me that the Chatzir is because they consented in Lash Mehezik, and the Gina is because there's Ein Hara. B'chein Katani. Same reason. Oh.
What the damage is
so you must say that there's always a hezekriya. The question is, what kind of hezekriya? Is hezekriya because I'm watching the guy sunbathe, or is hezekriya because I'm doing ein hara? But it's still hezekriya, and like the tzemach said, that kind of implied. Tzemach said that kind of implied that hezekriya is part of hezekriya is the issue of ein hara or in a bracha shayel talking about someone ayin is connected to hezekriya, right? So it's two types of hezekriya.
Ein hara is one of the outcomes.
Exactly. Exactly. Ein hara is another. All of these things are all outcomes of hezekriya, whatever they happen to be. So we're stuck with another problem. The l'chuda gina, the Mishnah implied with the word v'chein that the reason for gina, for building a wall on a gina, and the reason for building a wall on a chutz is the same. Says the Gemara gina shiny. It says the Gemara katani agvilu gazes. When the Mishnah says v'chein, that the same thing is true, not because of the reason, but because on the type of wall. Meaning to say, we're going to maintain, and now you can see why it says it's a deflection. We're going to maintain that the reason why you're building a wall in a chutzner is because you consented because laf mehezek. And the reason why you're building a wall in a gina is not because you consented, but because you're being compelled because of ayin hara. So why we're saying v'chein, comparing the two laws, we're only comparing the two laws in that when you build a wall, it's got to be the same kind of wall. Even though the reasons why you're building a wall are completely different. One's for ayin hara and one's because you consented. Right? So it's a shtickle deflection.
Safety issue.
So that's also a good kasha. So I was just thinking of, I don't know the answer to that. Oh, but it depends on the minute. Go by the minute. I guess. We saw in the Mukhi Yosef one way of thinking that a gina is worse than a chatzar, right? And one way of thinking it's not worse than a chatzar. Remember? Because ayin hara issue, right? Because ayin hara issue. Right, but ayin hara doesn't need to have a big wall. But I guess the issue is it's going to fall down later. Maybe you need a big wall. Anyway, okay. Let's see the Tosafos now. And then we'll conclude after the Tosafos. When we only do the first Tosafos, just one line. The second Tosafos will be for next week. Because this Tosafos is just going to tell us a different way of learning the Gemara. Tashma v'chein begina. So this is going to articulate for us what the question of the Gemara was, v'chein begina, which we already said. What's the question of v'chein begina? Why do the words v'chein begina contradict the idea of Shmei Hezek? Because you are told that you have to build a wall. When l'chura, if lav Shmei Hezek, it's dependent on your consent, not on machayv, not obligatory. So says the Tosafos, and this is Tosafos articulating what we just said. We'll come on later. Maskina, the Gemara is going to conclude. The hachik amar v'chein begina. That when the Mishnah says the word v'chein begina, what it means is stam, in a place where there is no custom about whether or not you should build a wall in a garden. You should consider it as if it's a pazaminag, meaning to say you're compelled. Therefore, indeed, the Gemara can point out that Hezek is a Hezek, because the Mishnah, in other words, it was a question of a minhag. If it was limited to when there's a minhag, so you could say this place happens to have a minhag that they consider Hezek to be a Hezek. But from the fact that the Gemara says, when there is no minhag, you consider it like a place that has a minhag, which means it's mamish, you're being compelled, even if there's no minhag. That's a clear daya that Hezek Kriyash Hezek. Right? Now, there's two questions here. And this is my suggested reading. You know what, you can end the Gemara right here and everything's fine. And leave it. But the two problems that I have with this Gemara. Number one, why is Rashi silent? Rashi doesn't explain what the question of v'chein begina is. And moreover, we're going to see in 2 lines from now, the Gemara is going to quote another Mishnah, and there the Gemara is going to quote not just the beginning of the Mishnah, but the whole Mishnah, and the Gemara is going to conclude with the words Machayv and Oisoi, and Rashi there is going to comment that because Machayv and Oisoi, that's a raya that it's not about consent, it's about Hezek Riyah. So if the question of v'chein begina is also, as Tosafos is implying, because Machayv and Oisoi, then Rashi should have said so, or even the Gemara should have said so straight up. The Gemara should have quoted v'chein begina Machayv and Oisoi. There's the raya. Or Tosafos or Rashi at least should have said that because the Gemara the Mishnah is going to say that v'chein begina Machayv and Oisoi, therefore there's a question. Like Tosafos says. Tosafos said the Gemara is relying not just on the words Machayv and Oisoi in the Mishnah, but it's relying on the Gemara's interpretation later.
You're talking about this Rashi that's in the
Yeah, coming right up. In the next question. In the very next question, the Gemara is going to ask the question of Koisel. The Gemara is going to quote the words Machayv and Oisoi, and Rashi is going to explain that the words Machayv and Oisoi implies that because you're compelled, it's not about your consent, it's your compelling, and therefore it's Hezek Riyah. But if that's also the question of the v'chein begina, then Rashi should have said so. In the first instance, which is not in the second question, but in the first question, v'chein begina. What's the question v'chein begina? Because later the Gemara Mishnah says Machayv and Oisoi. Tosafos tells you that the Gemara's question is not just relying on the words of Machayv and Oisoi, which you already learned because it's last page, right? Even though the Gemara didn't quote the words Machayv and Oisoi, but you learned it in the last page. But Tosafos says not only are you relying on that, you're actually relying on the Gemara and Daf Daled, which you not necessarily learned yet. But because the Gemara there tells you that in the place where there is no minhag, you follow as if there is a minhag, that's a raya, that's Machayv and Oisoi. So Tosafos is telling you to rely on the Gemara comes later. Rashi is telling you to rely on the Gemara that comes later. Rashi doesn't work that way. Rashi is a pashtan. He's meant to tell you the simple reading of Gemara as you're going forward. So why is Rashi silent in the words v'chein begina? And why does the Gemara quote the words Machayv and Oisoi? This is my problem with leaving the Gemara as is. And therefore, Ula Yesh Lemar, the words v'chein begina themselves is is the question. This is the words v'chein begina. And a very, very simple reason. If the vart is, why are you building the wall? Because you consented? Then who cares if it's a chatzah? Who cares if it's a gina? Who cares if it's a bika? If the two of you consented to build a wall, you're compelled to build a wall. Why would the Mishnah B'chlal split the clauses? So the words v'chein begina themselves are the kasha. Why split the clauses? If the vart is you guys consented, then who cares if it's a chatzah or gina? What's the difference? And the Mishnah right there.
So even in the beginning, didn't we just say b'chatzer?
Exactly. Oh, so if it only said b'chatzer and didn't say b'chein begina, so you could say lishna. What's the lashon in the Gemara? The Gemara says lishna. Like what the Gemara is using, the Mishnah is using the most common language. That's not an uncommon thing. But the Gemara uses there's a phrase in the Gemara for this kind of thing, where the Mishnah uses where the Mishnah uses language that's most common, right? So had the Mishnah said the word b'chatzer and ended right by b'chein begina, fine. In other words, like this, it's very possible. The Gemara's question is a very simple question. And the Mishnah before the words b'chein begina, done. You both consented, therefore you're mechuyev. No, but the kasha is on the word v'chein. So the word kasha is on the word v'chein. That's the question is. And the Gemara's answer is, no, it's a new din. The first din was because you wanted, now it's a din because of Ayin Hara. And now because in Ayin Hara, you have to go to Bika and find out there's other rules there. Right? Because it was all a question of consent, end it there. That Ulai Yishlemar is another way of reading the question, and why Rashi is silent on that. Because it's so obvious. You consented, finished. And it's kind of funny because I said the same thing earlier. Once you guys shook hands, it's pshita. Everything's obvious. You consented. It's all over. Right? Anyway, Ulay Shlemar. Okay, Mitzvah tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to go weiter in the Gemara. And I'm happy we're doing 2 nights Shiurim because it's still going to be fresh in our heads tomorrow. Yeah. And we'll be able to go weiter and not have to do a whole chazara. And we're going to see tomorrow, at least in the way Tosafos learns, that each of the 6 questions the Gemara asks now is going to further curtail the opinion which is Lash Mehezek. The Gemara says Lash Mehezek, right? The Gemara is not asking all these questions on Lash Mehezek. And the way Tosafos is going to learn, what's going to come out is that each time the Gemara asks a question, the Gemara further limits the idea of Lash Mehezek. And today you already have one. There's Taka Hezek, Lash Mehezek, except when it's Ayin Hara. So you already have one exception to the rule. So almost there's nothing left. The Gemara is going to keep on diminishing the extent of Lash Mehezek. And we're going to see that that's the way Tosafos is going to learn L'choda, which is going to explain, even though the Gemara, Tosafos said Pshita is, according to the opinion Lash Mehezek, yet the Gemara still splits that question from the other ones. Because Pshita is a question in Pshat in the Gemara, whereas these 6 questions completely limit the opinion of Lash Mehezek, which further prove to Tosafos that it's deflections, and therefore the halacha is Hezek Shvish Mehezek. So Ulai, we'll see it all, God willing, tomorrow.
Interesting.